I'm Alex, 21, and for as long as I can remember I've been the odd one out, the black sheep everyone seemed to quietly agree didn't belong. My dad, David, never hid the fact that he wasn't fond of me. You could see it in the way he looked at me, in the tone of his voice. He ran my grandfather's small HVAC business, the same one my grandfather had built from scratch decades ago. Here's the twist though, the business was never really his. My grandfather set it up inside a trust designed to benefit only his biological grandchildren. So while my dad worked there every day, he had no actual control over anything that mattered, and that's always eaten at him. Money management has never been his strong suit, and my grandfather clearly didn't trust him to handle the company's finances. That's the backdrop. Now here's where everything started to unravel. My half-brother Ryan, who's 23, has always been the golden boy. My dad treats him like he can't possibly make a mistake, like every move he makes is brilliant. Meanwhile, I've always been the one blamed for anything that went wrong. It didn't matter what the issue was, if there was a problem, somehow it got pinned on me. For years I couldn't understand why. Then, about 3 years ago, my father found a set of old journals my mother, Laura, had been keeping for years. The day he opened them was the day my world tilted on its axis. Buried in those pages was the secret that my mother had been having a long-term affair no one ever knew about. One of the men involved was her longtime lover, who had died in a car crash about 12 years earlier. And that wasn't the only revelation. The affair had gone on for years. My dad kept what he discovered under wraps for a while, but he and my mom fought like wild animals after he found out. Days of shouting, slamming doors, and icy silence. At first I thought it was just another one of their normal fights. Then my father dropped a bombshell on me and Ryan. We were both going to have to take DNA tests. We sat there stunned, trying to process what he just said. My grandfather, the one who started the business, had always distrusted my mom. He thought she was deceitful and had suspected for years that one or even both of us kids might not actually be my dad's. And that suspicion, if proven, would decide who inherited everything. If a test revealed that either of us wasn't biologically his, that person would get nothing. No claim to the family business, no share of the fortune, nothing at all. I could see the fury in my father's eyes when he explained it. He already looked like he was gearing up to throw me out. He'd always treated me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't part of the family. I used to think I was just being sensitive or paranoid, but that DNA test made it clear. The only reason he even cared now was because of money and control. If it weren't for the business, he wouldn't have cared whose kid I was. So the three of us drove to the lab for testing, and that car ride was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. My father stared straight ahead in total silence, like he already knew what the results would show. Ryan sat beside me in the back seat with that smug, self-satisfied grin of his, like he was already picturing me getting tossed out. I just stared out the window, numb, realizing my entire future now hinged on a swab of DNA. We finished the test, but the waiting nearly broke me. They said it would take just a few days, but every hour felt like a year. I barely slept, lying awake, imagining every possible outcome and how it would blow up my life. I couldn't even decide which scenario would be worse, finding out I wasn't my father's son and getting cut off, or watching my dad's world implode if Ryan turned out to be the outsider. Finally, the day came. We went to the lawyer's office to get the results. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The lawyer opened the envelope, and the room seemed to fall into absolute silence. He read the results aloud. I was my father's biological son. Ryan was not. The air went dead. My father's face drained of color, while Ryan sat there, jaw hanging open like the floor had disappeared beneath him. And in that moment, after all those years of being treated like dirt, I felt a flash of cold satisfaction. I was the true son. Not Ryan, the golden boy. But things got even wilder from there. It turned out the house we were living in was also part of the trust, which meant legally it belonged to me, not Ryan. My dad had always assumed Ryan would inherit everything. But now, on paper, Ryan had no claim to anything, the business, the house, all of it defaulted to me. On the ride home, my father didn't say a word. Ryan wouldn't shut up, insisting the test had to be wrong, calling it unfair, acting like it was all some big mistake. But my father just looked broken. I'd never seen him like that. The gruff, distant man I'd grown up with seemed like someone who just had his entire life pulled out from under him. That night, he came into my room. His eyes were red and puffy, he'd been crying. I'd never seen my father cry before, and it shook me. He sat down on the edge of my bed and started talking, apologizing, saying he'd screwed everything up and wanted to fix things between us. He sounded desperate, almost pleading for forgiveness. But I couldn't give it. Not after everything. Not after a lifetime of being treated like I didn't matter. So I said the only thing I could think of. If you really want to make this right, kick Ryan out. You were ready to throw me out if I wasn't your son, now do the same with him. My father just stared at me like he couldn't believe I'd actually said it. He started to push back, talking about family therapy, about working through this together. But I cut him off. I told him flat out. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You were ready to toss me out if I wasn't yours." Well, now it's Ryan's turn. He cried even harder, but in the end, he agreed. That same night Ryan got kicked out. My dad didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, he just stood there with tears in his eyes and told Ryan it was time to go. Ryan exploded with anger, but there wasn't much he could do. He shoved his stuff into bags and stormed out. You'd think after all of that, things between me and my parents might finally improve. But nope. If anything, things went downhill even faster. My dad has been walking around like a shell of himself ever since. And my mom? She hasn't said a single word about any of it. She goes about her day like nothing ever happened, which only makes me angrier. I honestly don't know what the next chapter looks like, but if I'm being real, this family is past the point of repair. After Ryan left, the house didn't settle down the way you'd expect. Instead, the tension thickened. My dad drifted around like a ghost, barely speaking, while my mom stayed frozen in silence, acting like she could erase everything by ignoring it. Even though I still lived under that roof, the place felt hollow, like the walls had gone cold. I had thought kicking Ryan out might change the atmosphere, but it only pulled my parents further away from me. The first few days, it felt like we were all waiting for some unseen disaster to hit. My dad looked like he was constantly rehearsing something in his head, but when it came time to talk to me, he shut down. I could see the pain written all over him, but I wasn't about to comfort the man who had spent my whole life making me feel worthless. Now I was supposed to pity him? No chance. About a week after Ryan left, my dad finally tried to sit me down for a serious talk. He slumped into a chair in the living room, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He kept fidgeting, opening his mouth like he wanted to speak but then pulling back. That alone was strange. This was the same man who had never hesitated to blurt out whatever crossed his mind. Eventually, he forced the words out. He told me, "Alex, I know I wasn't a good father. I know things are a mess now, but I want to fix this." He rambled on about rebuilding our relationship, making things right, reconnecting. And then he started crying again, which honestly shocked me. Before this DNA mess, I'd never once seen my dad cry. I let him get his words out, but the longer he went on, the more my anger built. He was sitting there acting like he cared so deeply, and all I could think was how fake it sounded. Finally, I snapped. I told him flat out, "You never cared about me. You never did. All you've ever cared about is the business and the money." The look on his face was like I'd punched him. He sat frozen, stunned that I'd said it out loud. But it was the truth, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite history as some touching father-son moment. Of course, he tried to push back. He said, "No, Alex, you've got it wrong. I love you. I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to show it." But by then, it was too late. After that night, the silence between us grew thicker. He stopped trying to reach out, and I was fine with that. My mom? She stayed as quiet as ever, like a statue that never blinked. I started spending more hours at work, just so I wouldn't have to sit in that suffocating house. Working at the family business wasn't my dream, but it kept me distracted. That's when Ryan started calling. At first I ignored him. Why would I want to hear from him? He'd already left scorched earth behind him. But he kept calling. Eventually, I picked up, and he started rambling. Then he dropped something that nearly knocked me out of my chair. He said Mom hadn't only cheated with that guy who died in the car crash. There was another one, a coworker from an old job. And then he threatened me. He said if I didn't help him get back into the house, he'd tell Dad everything. I couldn't believe it. I always knew Mom wasn't perfect, but this was a new level. And Ryan swore he had proof. He claimed Dad had always suspected none of us were his kids. Then he twisted the knife. "Look, Alex, I don't want to ruin everything, but if you don't help me, I'll tell Dad the truth. Mom will be out on the street, and this family will go up in flames." I told him I'd think about it and hung up. Then I just sat there staring at the wall, numb. Ryan had always been a jerk, but blackmail? That was another league altogether. If he wanted to burn the family down, maybe I should just let him. A few weeks later, I found out he hadn't been bluffing. My dad was still moping around the house like a man mourning his own life, and my mom stayed locked in her own silence. I kept my head down, working and avoiding the house as much as possible. But secrets never stay buried. One night I overheard shouting. My dad's voice thundered through the house. "You think I don't know? You think I'm an idiot?" Then I heard my mom's shaky voice. "David, please, it was years ago. It doesn't mean anything now." My stomach dropped. Ryan had done it. He told Dad about the other man. I stood there, overwhelmed by a swirl of emotions, relief that the truth was out, fury at Ryan for detonating it, guilt for knowing it might be my fault for not warning anyone. When I looked at my dad, I swear he'd aged a decade in a single night. His face was ashen, his shoulders sagging. He asked me if I'd known. And I told him the truth, that I only found out when Ryan called me a few weeks earlier. He nodded slowly, pale as a ghost, and then he said something that hit me like a truck. I never trusted your mom after that first affair. And I never trusted either of you boys either. That's why I treated you the way I did. I just stood there frozen. Hearing him say it out loud was different than just suspecting it. And then, without another word, he walked out. For the next few days, the house felt like a minefield. Every step, every word felt like it might set something off. My dad completely shut my mom out, either locked in his office or staying late at work, while she kept herself holed up in their bedroom upstairs. It was unsettling, but at the same time, I couldn't help thinking it was long overdue. Honestly, they should have divorced years ago. Then, out of nowhere, Ryan came back. Yeah, after everything, he had the audacity to show up at the front door on a Saturday afternoon, standing there with that smug grin plastered across his face. He started right in, saying, "Come on, Alex, don't act like that. I didn't want to tell Dad, but you left me no choice. You kicked me out, remember?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was really trying to twist it so he came off as the victim? When I didn't budge, he sighed dramatically, like he was already bored of his own excuses. "Look, it's not about that. I just want things to go back to how they were. We used to be a family." I actually laughed in his face. A family? Was he serious? I told him straight he wasn't welcome here anymore. That smirk stayed on his face, like he thought he'd scored some kind of win anyway. "Fine," he said. "But don't be shocked when Mom and Dad split because of all this. You're just as much to blame as I am." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there on the porch, fists clenched and blood boiling. His words wouldn't leave my head though. Was he right? Had I played a role in tearing this family apart? But deep down I knew the truth. This family had been broken long before any of this. No amount of fake apologies or half-hearted "let's be a family again" speeches could put it back together. Update 2. Things didn't settle down after Ryan's little stunt. If anything, everything unraveled faster. My dad barely spent time at home anymore. He left early, came back late, and locked himself in his office like the house didn't exist. My mom, Laura, kept her silence, not speaking to him or me. I caught myself wondering if maybe I'd made things worse by pushing so hard to get Ryan kicked out. Maybe if I'd handled things differently, this wouldn't have spiraled like it did. But then I'd remind myself they were ready to throw me out the second they thought I wasn't biologically my dad's. So why should I feel guilty? Still, living in a house where everyone acted like the others didn't exist was its own kind of hell. A few weeks later, my dad finally approached me. His face was pale, his eyes glued to the floor. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered. "You mean Mom?" I asked. He nodded, still staring at his hands. "I can't forgive her. I thought maybe I could, but I can't. Too much damage has been done." I wasn't shocked, it had been coming for years, but hearing him admit it out loud was different. "So that's it? You're ending it?" I asked. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "Yeah. I know it's a lot. But I can't keep pretending. Did my feelings even matter?" I wasn't sure. Either way, the idea of my parents splitting felt strange, even if it was inevitable. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, not really knowing how else to respond. He stepped closer and put a hand on my shoulder. It felt awkward, forced. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know this hasn't been easy on you." Then he walked out, leaving me sitting there with more questions than answers. I figured he'd eventually tell her, but I didn't want to be there for it. And then one night, it happened. I was lying in bed when I heard shouting downstairs. My chest tightened instantly. He was telling her. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. My mom sobbing, yelling, begging him not to do this. She admitted she'd made mistakes but said she still loved him. My dad's voice, cold and unyielding, refused to budge. The next morning, she didn't leave her room. My dad sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee and reading the paper like nothing had happened. I grabbed a quick bite, avoided eye contact, and left for work. By the time I came home that evening, everything had changed. My mom had packed her things. Suitcases lined the hallway. She stood there waiting for me. She pulled me into a hug and whispered, "I'm sorry, Alex. I hope we can fix this someday." I couldn't bring myself to hug her back. I just stood stiff, waiting for her to let go. She picked up her bags and walked out without another word. And just like that, she was gone. Update 3. After my mom left, it was just me and my dad rattling around in that empty house. It felt heavier, emptier, like the air itself had been drained out. We barely spoke. He kept doing his routine, going to work, sitting at the table, pretending things were normal. And me? I drowned myself in TV, trying to block out the fact that my family had collapsed. Then my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Ryan. We need to talk. I almost laughed when I saw it. What was there left to say? Ryan had blown our family apart, blackmailed me, and now suddenly wanted to talk. At first, I ignored his text, but then my phone kept buzzing, one message after another. It's important. I'm serious, Alex. You can't ignore me forever. He just wouldn't stop. After about 10 of those, I gave up and called him. My voice came out sharper than I intended. What the hell do you want? Ryan let out this heavy sigh, like he was the victim. Come on, Alex. Don't act like this family was perfect before. I don't know. I did what I had to do. That was it. My blood was boiling. What you had to do? You destroyed everything, Ryan. You blew us all up because you were pissed about being kicked out. Don't sit there acting like some innocent bystander. He went quiet for a second, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd finally shut him up. But then he started in again, talking about how there was still time to fix things. How we could hold some family intervention, sit everyone down, force them to talk it out. He really believed we could stitch this back together like some corny movie where everyone hugs at the end and the credits roll. I cut him off mid-sentence. Ryan, stop. Just stop. This isn't a movie. You can't force forgiveness. You can't make people forget what happened. Dad's done. He's already filed. This time, his silence lasted longer. When he finally spoke again, his tone was different. Not angry, not smug, just hollow, like he knew something precious was gone. And maybe that was the only thing we still shared. Because truthfully, we had all lost something. Look, I said, softer now. I get it. This sucks. It sucks for all of us. But it's too late. There's no fixing it. For a brief second, I thought maybe he understood. But then he ruined it by saying, well, I'm going to try anyway. That's when I knew. Ryan was gone, lost in his own fantasy. He truly believed sheer effort could glue back what had been shattered for years. I almost wished it was that simple. But life doesn't bend that way. I buried myself in work, trying to outrun the weight of it all, but the heaviness never left. It followed me like a storm cloud, waiting. One night, after another long shift, I came home and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up as I walked in. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Alex. I froze. It had been so long since he'd spoken to me like that. I'm sorry, I blurted. I didn't expect that. He shook his head. For what? For everything? His eyes dropped to his hands. I've messed up. It wasn't some dramatic, tearful confession. But it was something. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a sliver left to salvage between us. We didn't hug. He didn't try to be tough or cold. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, stripped of all that armor he'd always worn. For the first time, I thought he looked real. Just tired. Just sad. We stayed like that, in silence. Not a good silence, not exactly comforting, but not hostile either. And strangely enough, that silence felt more like progress than all the shouting we'd ever done. Eventually, I stood up and said I was going to bed. He only nodded. Later, I heard the TV come on downstairs. Maybe that was his version of normal. Since then, things have stayed strange, but at least they've been steady. My mom never came back. She called once to say she was staying with her sister for a while. She didn't ask to talk to me. Ryan hasn't texted again. Thank God. And me? I'm left here, trying to figure out what to do with everything I've inherited, the business, the house, the silence, the wreckage. People think learning I was the real son would feel like victory. But it doesn't. It feels like standing in the ruins alone. I never wanted a throne. I just wanted a family. And now I don't have either.